You know, you boys ought to get out more often. That's a year off my life.
It's the Popcorn Digest with Gareth and Andy. Hello and welcome to Popcorn Digest, the podcast about the films you love and some you don't. My voice cracked then.
Some you don't.
1 second, let me just take a drink.
Sorry, Mr. Wazowski.
I nearly coughed right into my bottle of Coke. I'm your host, Gareth Green, and joining me as always is my full-time co-host and part-time tentacle admirer, Andrew Raphael.
Oh, I just love those tentacles.
And for this week's episode, we're boarding the cruise ship of H.P Lovecraft's dreams as we take on Stephen Sommers Deep Rising, a film that sounds like it's named after an impending bowel movement. But is this creature feature too much for us to digest? Find out after the trailer.
Welcome to the greatest pleasure ship ever built. Good times forever!
I have something here, sir. I've never seen anything like this.
It's a malfunction, sir. That's impossible. Where are they coming from?
I don't know, sir, but whatever it is, it's, big.
They answered a distress call.
Where the hell is everybody?
Now,
What the hell was that?
they're dead in the water.
I got a really bad feeling about this.
The ship's infested. Let's get the hell out of here!
What the hell is that?
The girl from Ipanema.
I don't mean to sound like a wuss, but this is starting to freak me out, man.
I vote we leave. Who votes we leave?
If you liked the Poseidon adventure but thought it needed 100% more squid monsters, well boy have we got a film for you. With more tentacles than a Japanese porno, Deep Rising finds a host of mercenaries and crewmen fighting their way off a doomed cruise ship. With an all-star cast led by Harrison Ford's direct-to-DVD alternative, Treat Williams, this Stephen Sommers creature feature sees its heroes picked off in a variety of gruesome ways, but mostly by being pulled backwards through very small spaces. And I will say that if watching people get violently pulled to their death through very small spaces is your fetish, then I think we found your Caligula. So Andy, what did you think of Deep Rising? Is this your first time tangling with this tentacled nightmare?
No, I'm trying to think when I first saw this. I think you showed this to me at some point, maybe about 6 or 7 years ago.
I did.
Around a similar time when we watched Tremors for the first time. We may have been doing like a monster movie marathon at yours or something like that, and you put this one on. I do remember preferring the other film.
Yeah.
I didn't initially like this film too much. I didn't quite get it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether it was because it was a bit jarring going from the other film to this, but I didn't particularly like it. So going into this one, I wasn't particularly looking forward to it. But rewatching it, I actually enjoyed it a hell of a lot more because I think I decided before watching it, I would watch it with a certain viewpoint.
Yeah.
And I don't know what possessed me to watch it in this way, but I watched it in the viewpoint that it was a sequel to Big Trouble in Little China.
Okay.
And that Treat Williams was playing Jack Burton. And I had so much more fun with it because of that. Because I think the film would have done better if it had lent a little bit more into that area.
Yeah.
Because it almost does. It's like an almost movie.
Yes.
Where it doesn't quite lean one way or the other. Mm-hmm. And I think that's maybe the problem of it. And I think, I feel like Treat Williams is channeling a little bit of Jack Burton here and there.
Definitely, yeah.
I think it would have been great if this had been a sequel to Big Trouble in Little China, because you've still got the Chinese references in the South China Sea. Yeah, the Treat Williams character is basically Jack Burton, toned down a little. Yeah, and I think you could have had fun with that kind of him being a hero and actually messing it up.
Yeah.
And I watched it with that in mind, and it worked so much more for me because I think the first time I watched it, I was just like, what the fuck is Treat Williams doing in this film? Because, it was so clearly written for somebody else. And he's having a lot of fun with it, but in that kind of Jack Burton-ish way. And watching it in that context, I just It just won me over a lot more.
Yeah, I will say that I've actually written in my notes that this is a film that requires you to go in with a certain expectation for a certain type of film.
Yeah.
This is an episode that I picked for us to do on the podcast. And I will say, this is a film that I really quite genuinely like. Quite a lot, in fact. But I know the type of trash it is. And I remember the strong reaction that we got from yourself the first time we watched it together. And I remembered laughing a lot as we watched the film together for that first time. And I thought this would be a great choice just to see if anything's changed since then. And yeah, I think by like meeting the film halfway, by going in with a certain expectation of knowing what that film's going to be, has really worked in Deep Rising's favor. Because this really opens the door for us to talk about Stephen Sommers as well as a filmmaker and what's happened to that career. His filmography is hardly an embarrassment of riches.
It's a strange old filmography, actually.
It very much is, and I would say that it peaked very early for me with Deep Rising. So I suppose before we actually begin discussing the film, it's time for us to go into the context, the making of the film. And one of the things that you did mention just then when you were talking about Treat Williams as a character is that when you first saw it, it felt like he was playing a role that had been written for somebody else as well. Like, what is he doing in this film? And I will say, it was written for Harrison Ford.
Yeah.
And originally this was intended to be a much larger budgeted movie. However, Harrison Ford, for reasons unknown, it would be a mystery from here to eternity, but he declined to show his face in this movie.
Yeah, and you're talking about a Harrison Ford that was doing stuff like 6 Days, 7 Nights around this time.
So what you're telling me, Andy, is it's peak Harrison Ford.
Yeah.
It is a strange one, I guess. But I think Treat Williams does a good... I really like Treat Williams, actually, to be honest. And he's one of those actors as well that... I mean, I'll go into this more when we start to discuss the film in general, but we've spoken about films in the past. I'm going back to like our Waterworld episode with Dennis Hopper, where you have these very serious films with really goofy premises and nobody seems to be in on a joke, but every now and again you get one actor in on the mix like Dennis Hopper in Waterworld that seems to be completely in on it. I will say that with Deep Rising, at least all of the actors involved in this film seem to be very much in on the fact of the type of film that's being made, and as such they're just having fun with it. So what I'm saying is Deep Rising is essentially if every actor was played by Dennis Hopper in Waterworld. Okay, but yes, so we should go into the making of. I'm going to say as well that Stephen Sommers began writing the script for this film. It does have a script, you'll be shocked to find out. And I was actually quite shocked to find out I'd completely forgotten that this was a Hollywood Pictures production.
Yep, Disney movie.
This is a Disney film.
Yep.
We talk about that Disney identity crisis, but really what happened to this side of Disney, the Buena Vista Hollywood Pictures? We've spoken about Hollywood Pictures as well having an identity crisis in the past. Where does it fit in the kind of Disney construct? Because it's always felt out of place because they had Buena Vista there anyway.
Yeah.
But watching these films and watching these kind of 90s action and horror movies from Disney, it makes me think, when was the decision made to stop doing these type of films?
Yeah, I think what happened with all these other production arms, because actually there's a comment, I think from Stephen Sommers himself, I'm not sure whether it was him or somebody else, but there's a comment on the IMDb of Deep Rising talking about this, like specifically saying that, you know, back in the 90s, they had all these different arms to do different kinds of films. You know, they had Miramax, they had Touchstone, they had Hollywood Pictures. And then saying now they've only got Marvel and Star Wars. And I was like, that's hitting the nail right on the head.
It really is.
And I think maybe what happened was two things, I think, and they both involve Jerry Bruckheimer. Around about the same time, you've got big budget failures like Pearl Harbor coming out through the Touchstone label. And that being a huge budget disaster movie, Titanic ripoff that is trying to do Titanic numbers and fails spectacularly. And then at the same time, a few years later, you've got films like Pirates of the Caribbean coming out that are also Jerry Bruckheimer films, but they are released through the Walt Disney Pictures label. They are considerably more successful. So I'm thinking around the 2000s and also during the kind of the dark days towards the end of the Eisner era going into the Bob Iger.
Those dark days.
I noticed that around the time that Iger takes over, he's more concentrating on the core Disney departments, i.e. things like Pixar, and acquiring other things like Marvel and the Muppets and everything else. And then obviously eventually Lucasfilm. And that seems to be the primary focus, and everything else just goes.
Yeah.
In that mid-2000s period, everything just goes. And I think because of the success of films like Pirates, they are focusing more and more on the family-friendly blockbuster in terms of the live-action department and all the other stuff that was big in the 90s. You know, you got to remember things like Pulp Fiction, The Rock,
Disney films,
Face Off. They're all Disney movies.
That's what I was going to mention. I mean, I know that a lot of it's tied into as well with the Disney acquisition of Miramax as well during this period of time. But watching this film, it suddenly made me think as well, like, wow, Disney used to make an incredibly varied palette of films.
Yeah.
Like, this is a real hard B-movie monster movie that leans very much into the gore and bloodshed. Like, there's some fantastic moments of gore in this film. And it's something that under the Disney brand now, through, I mean, even through one of its like sub companies, I couldn't imagine this type of film being released in its current form.
Nope.
And I look at that and I look at the 90s and I think, yeah, okay, so Disney might be in a more stable place in terms of the core films that it's releasing, in terms of its big tentpole productions. Like, the Marvel films essentially make $1 billion ahead. But I feel like it's lost something in terms of the variation of what it's making, the outlets that it has in order to make films. We spoke about it really at length in our Disney episode, but it feels very much limited in focus now. And when the House of Cards comes toppling down, I don't think it's going to have much to add to the cinematic landscape anymore.
No, they haven't got that bedrock of smaller budgeted or just more diverse films to fall back on now.
Yeah.
And also, like, if you think of Stephen Sommers' path as well, the fact that he was a staff writer at Hollywood Pictures, but he's come from, you know, a movie we mentioned only a few episodes ago, doing his previous film to this was that live-action Jungle Book movie with Jason Scott Lee. And prior to that, he did a film adaptation of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn with Elijah Wood and Robbie Coltrane, which I remember being out on video as a kid.
Yeah, I just been hit by a very vague memory of that, actually. I didn't know that was one of his Stephen Sommers films.
Yeah, that was his second film.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I take it as well from what you mentioned, that was like a Disney production in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it was a more of a Walt Disney Pictures Presents film. It was, and obviously the Jungle Book was as well, but because obviously all these production houses were essentially the same company, you know, if you had a film that was maybe more suited to a particular platform, you could do it as a Touchstone film or a Hollywood Pictures. I never really understood the distinction between Hollywood Pictures and Touchstone. I'm wondering whether it was mainly just to hoodwink people rather than, you know, in terms of like it's a bit like now where it's not so subtle with Disney, where if there's anything that's slightly risque, it goes to Hulu, but it's obvious because it's like it goes from Disney Plus to Hulu. Whereas I feel with Disney at that time, I'd say if you're doing a 12, but it's definitely more adult orientated, it goes to Touchstone. If you're doing, say, something that's R-rated and there's like a big action movie, it goes to Hollywood. And then if you're doing something a little bit more prestige, that's more of a drama, more low budget, then that goes to Miramax.
Of course, yeah.
And I felt like they had that kind of balance of things. And also it meant that people weren't thinking, oh, it's another Disney movie. I think that's what they had going for them back then, is that even though these were all bankrolled and distributed and produced by Disney, it didn't give that impression. It gave the impression that these were just movies that happened to be coming out through these labels.
Just independent entities.
Yeah.
Divorced from the Disney brand.
And I think that gets, in a way, spoiled again by Jerry Bruckheimer, because that seemed to work in the mid-90s, but towards the end of the 90s, beginning of the 2000s, it seemed like the only films of this type that were being made were Jerry Bruckheimer films, and it became increasingly obvious that that was their more adult wing, and all these things went to the wayside after a very short period of time, actually.
I mean, and even Jerry Bruckheimer as well, in terms of the type of film he made, I think he became pigeonholed as being a filmmaker that makes just a certain type of film, one after the other after the other.
Yeah.
And that culminated with the likes of, Prince of Persia, Sands of Time as well, which was just a blatant carbon copy of Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah. Obviously, the Lone Ranger as well.
Oh, and of course the Lone Ranger.
Yeah, yeah.
It feels like a cautionary tale as well in terms of putting all of your eggs in one basket in terms of making just one type of film. It doesn't appear to be a cautionary tale that Hollywood ever seems to learn from. It just seems to be the thing that they fall into, the hole that they fall into time after time after time.
It's almost like they had all this diversity because I think even, Jackie Brown's still a Disney movie. That was like Tarantino made 2 films for Miramax around that time. And that both Pulp Fiction and Jackie Brown are under the Disney wing. But it definitely became more and more formula as the 90s closed and it went into the 2000s. And I noticed it even as a kid because I used to go to Disney World a lot. And in the Disney MGM Studios, which is now Hollywood Studios, they had a backlot tour special effects thing. And obviously, because that was more live action orientated rather than the animated films, they would plug their live action releases, especially the action films. So you would get demonstrations that are based on Pearl Harbor or something like that. Yeah. And the more times I went, the more obvious it became that was the only thing that they were producing outside of the animation.
I will say that Deep Rising does have a moment in this film that does feel like it's just the whole climax of this film with the jet ski feels like it's I'm going to one of those Disney action shows. Yeah. Especially with the jet ski jumping towards the camera at the end through the flames. It feels very, very much like a Disney live action show.
Yeah, where you're in the action.
Yeah, exactly.
And they do you blue screen on this jet ski and it's like behind a big fireball. It's definitely a stunt show moment, that one.
It really is.
But it's because of these paths that Stephen Sommers was able to go from doing movies like The Adventures of Huck Finn and The Jungle Book to doing something like this within the same studio.
Yeah.
And that's something that doesn't happen anymore.
And he did have some pushback as well from the studio in terms of them trying to make it into a PG-13 action romp.
Yeah.
It's one of those stories that you hear about with regards to Stephen Sommers having a very strong opinion on what he wanted this film to be. And he and the other filmmakers involved really pushed hard in terms of making this a very gory, but I would say in a way tastefully gory. It's not like an exploitation film or something like that. They pick their moments for their gore and as to make it as effective as possible. And he really fought hard to make it the R-rated film that it is. I think that really pays off as well. And it feels like it's a battle and a fight that I've not seen in Stephen Sommers' films since, in terms of like having the vision of making something a certain way and making sure it is that. Everything else feels like it's just a mess.
I wonder whether it was more pushed to be PG-13 when Harrison Ford was being coaxed into being in the film, and then as soon as he refused and they got someone like Treat Williams and the budget was downsized, that they decided it's less of a financial risk, you can now make this as an R-rated film, because it still has that kind of slight uneasiness, because bar the odd F-bomb, it does feel like quite PG-13 at times in terms of the character interactions, but the gore and the monstrous stuff is definitely R-rated. But you've still got these kind of PG-13 comic booky kind of characters going around the ship.
Yes, definitely.
So you've got that. It does feel there's some sort of like slight sense of unease there.
I would say, I mean, it's one of the things that I've actually mentioned in my notes as being a real positive for the film. And it's why I think that the creatures actually work so well, is that the characters themselves are fun and comic booky, and as you mentioned, they're painted in very broad colours. But when it comes to the monsters, they're never really used in a way that ever lets us like laugh at them or that type of thing. It's like the grossest way that we can show this thing, or what's the scariest way that we can do it within this film. They never really use the monsters themselves as a way to kind of like, they're never really poked fun at.
No.
And I think that makes them more impactful when they do eventually show up, because it does take a while for them to show up in the film. And especially the method of killing people is incredibly upsetting. Again, that's something that we'll go into very shortly. Talking about the monsters, though, we really do need to speak about the special effects in terms of who is involved in creating these special effects. So, first off, I'll just mention that There are some very small but noticeable practical effects used in this film that were actually achieved by, famed special effects maestro Rob Bottin. And this, I've discovered, was actually the last film that he worked on before his retirement. Is that correct?
Well, I looked at that and then I watched something else and I was like, yeah, I think this is the last big creature feature that he did, but he did do other things like Serving Sarah and Charlie's Angels and Mr. Deeds before his retirement. But yeah, I think this is the last major Rob Bottin because, some of the last couple of films that he worked on, I'm like, what is he doing there? And maybe that's the reason why Rob Bottin is no longer in the industry. Like, maybe he just got, what the fuck am I doing these kind of films? I don't know.
It does have a very the thingy element to it as well in terms of some of the set pieces. There's a lot of I almost said floorboards, but there's not really many floorboards on this ship. But there's like walls crushing in and floorboards bursting up and that type of thing that remind me of John Carpenter as well. That feels like a gag straight out of the thing. But in terms of what Rob Bottin actually did on this film, because the creatures themselves are so entrenched in really like CGI imagery, I know that there's a couple of glimpses, a couple of flashes of like tentacles exploding as they shoot at them. But I want to ask, is it like, did he work primarily in regards to the bodies and that type of thing?
Yeah, I think so. There were a couple of effects as well that I think were deemed too gory and taken out of the film that were practical as well. I know that there's a thing that I saw earlier. I think I watched the Oliver Harper thing on Deep Rising, and there's a little thing in that talks about the death of Captain Atherton and how the way they originally shot that was a practical makeup effect where he was squeezed so hard that his brain popped out of his head. There's a practical, you can see the behind the scenes footage of this thing that they've made where the brain will pop out. And that was obviously cut back because they thought it was too horrific for that particular point in the movie. And obviously when you see the movie, he's sort of just enveloped by this grabber thing that they have.
He's pulled down, his leg goes up as well.
Yeah, that scene was a lot more gory. Yeah, I'm not sure whether this is maybe part of the issue where like some of this work has been toned down or replaced or something. So maybe this is the beginning of the end for Rob Bottin. I don't know.
It does feel that way, and it's a shame that it is on a film like Deep Rising, because although it is a big creature feature film, it's like, as I mentioned, it's primarily CGI in terms of how they approach those creatures.
Yeah, it's transitional, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And one thing I will say in regards to that gag that was cut, I also watched the Oliver Harper retrospective because I actually ordered the American Blu-ray to come to myself for this episode. So I was hoping to have seen all the new special features included on that Blu-ray release. However, it didn't arrive, so I've had to do a lot of research just via YouTube, IMDb trivia, that type of thing. And as such, I've seen the same video. But the first thing that I actually thought of in regards to that gag is, it perhaps was a bit too much for that stage in the film. However, I actually think that it might have been the fact as well that it came too close to one of the deaths in Anaconda.
Yeah.
One of the things with regards to this film, and we're going to talk about the stats and facts later, is it was a monster movie that originally was conceived at a time when there weren't no big budget monster movies of this ilk. But because it took so long to make, with regards to the special effects, after filming, they actually spent a year doing the special effects, which is also a very John Carpenter's The Thing type of situation.
Yeah.
But they spent a year working on the special effects, and it bounced around between a couple of different special effects companies before ILM were finally brought on in the very end to rescue the film, essentially. But by the time it was released, it came out in a year in which, to be honest, audiences were starting to get bored with creature features because so many had come out that year.
Yeah, I kind of, through looking at the sort of production and release of the film, I kind of get the impression that the issue with the special effects was actually a bit of a half-truth.
Yeah.
That maybe they were delayed a little bit, but it seemed like this film was shot in June 96 until the October and was intended for a May 97 release. And it got pushed back in favor of Con Air for that big summer release that they wanted. But I think for the fact that it came out in January of the following year, that it's a fuck you, it's January.
Fuck you, it's January.
Fuck you, it's January movie, that I think the studio just lost faith in it.
Yeah.
There could have been some delays, but I think that's not maybe the whole story. I think because the idea was that this was going to be the first big budget monster movie in a long time, and the fact that it ended up being at the tail end of that trend speaks volumes, because I just think that the studio just sort of weren't sure about it.
I saw this film very shortly after it came out, but on VHS, and I remember there being at one point something of not so much a fanfare surrounding the release of the film, but I remembered watching some special effects documentaries on TV that had been released at the time that were framed around the making of Deep Rising, and there's two major set pieces that they did speak about in that documentary, and one of them was the Poseidon adventure, like stopping of the ship where everybody loses their minds and there's a lot of mass hysteria and people trampling each other, because there was something like 500 extras involved in that.
Yeah.
That was a very intensive set piece for the stunt team and the second unit directors. And then the next one was the big jet ski sequence at the end of the film. I remember watching this documentary at the time and thinking, I want to see that film. And then it never really happened. I can't remember seeing any posters. And this is from somebody that lived at the cinema. I don't remember seeing really any posters or any trailers. And then one day it was just in the video shop on the wall.
Yeah.
And I was like, what happened? What happened to this film? I imagine it did get a cinema release, but it just never made it to my cinema. And when I did watch it on VHS, I loved it, because I was really into like Evil Dead and Sam Raimi and stuff like that at the time. Still am.
Yeah.
But I loved it at the time.
Yeah, I heard that the UK release was 7 months after the US release, so some point in July, August time.
Yeah.
So maybe it was just sort of buried amongst the whatever other summer movies were out at the time, and it was just given a limited theatrical release in UK cinemas, maybe a few hundred theatres.
Yeah.
I'm saying that because I don't even know how many theatres they had at the time, but obviously not a lot.
Yeah, 7.
Yeah. All in London.
All in the one square in London.
Yeah. But yeah, I just feel like at some point the studio just lost faith in this film, because I didn't, until you brought it out, I didn't even know it existed.
And you were very reticent towards watching it that first time around as well.
Because for me, like, barring all the earlier stuff, Stephen Sommers only really popped into my head around, the time of The Mummy, which was, in a timeline sense, the year after, but obviously there was a much bigger gap in time between the two films. I think as well, it's funny as well, because you've got people like Digimon Honsu in this film in very small roles, and I was looking at his filmography earlier, and because of the delay of this film, Amistad comes out before this, which he would have obviously filmed. I think it was the very next film that he must have done after doing Deep Rising, but the fact that it comes out before this film.
And didn't he get an Oscar nom for Amistad as well?
Yeah, and his whole career starts there, and then he obviously ends up being in Gladiator, and the list goes on. But yeah, he's in this film in a very small role, which obviously should have come out before Amistad, in a logical sense. But yeah.
Yeah, I've got in my notes as well that this film does seem to have a cast of actors that Sommers had no idea were about to become big stars.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't say that Cliff Curtis becomes a big star, but he certainly becomes a if you were making this film now, his character would survive more than 20 minutes.
Yeah. I mean,
that's
the strange thing about this film, is that the cast is, even though the lead has been replaced by somebody who's well known but not in the same bracket as, say, someone like Harrison Ford.
Yeah.
Or even, say, someone like Kurt Russell, because I could still see, like, Kurt Russell being in this film.
Definitely.
As that kind of character. I still think it's a shame that never happened. It's like, I just watched it in my mind as being a sequel to Big Trouble in Little China. It works so well as that.
You could call it Big Trouble and Little China Seas.
Yeah. I don't know. It kind of has that vibe, but yeah, there's so many like well-known people, or people that were going to be more well-known as time went on. Like, even like someone like Famke Janssen, who was only known for being Golden Knight at that point, but obviously would later be in like the X-Men films and Taken and all that kind of stuff. But the fact that Wes Studi's in this film as well, it's just
and he owns it.
It's very bizarre casting, actually, when you look at it. Like, on paper, it looks like this doesn't go together.
No. And Famke Janssen as well was actually a replacement for Claire Forlani.
Yeah, who was on the set for 3 days.
And to be honest, thinking of her as an actress as well and the type of films that she does and the type of roles that she has done in the past, I can't see her as this, I can't remember what it's called, like Trinity in St. James, is that the name of the character? I can't really see her in that role, actually, whereas Famke Janssen seems to fit the role like a glove.
Well, it's all right, I can. I kind of, in a way, I would imagine if she was in this film, she would be as herself, because around this time, a lot of the time she was doing American roles, but because Claire Forlani is actually English,
yeah,
with that name, I can imagine being like a sort of posh English safecracker. I'm thinking that might be what they were going for.
Trinity in St. James is a very English name, isn't it? Really,
Yeah.
like it's a very if you were writing a stock English safecracking character.
I mean, that's the thing as well. Like, I think that's, again, what makes it work. You've got these actors and they know what they're in.
Yeah.
There's no one who's taking it seriously. I think there are times when maybe the film itself is a little bit unsure as to where it's going. Mm-hmm. That's why I feel like the film is an almost movie in terms of its tone, because there are times where it is being irreverent and there's other times where it wants to be irreverent, but it doesn't have the wit to do that.
Yes.
I kind of feel like something that would have benefited this film if it had a rewrite by someone who was had a much better sense of like humor than
Yeah,
Stephen
it needed
Sommers.
someone like Patton Oswalt to come in and
It needed some like better
do some
zingers.
script doctoring. I have wrote at one point this for a film that I very much enjoy. The script is full of clunker lines.
Yeah.
But it moves so quickly and it moves from line to line in that way that you never really have enough time to dwell on one clunker line because it's the next one. It's like when you go see a stand-up comedian and all they do is one-liners. It's like when one doesn't land, it's okay, there's another one coming. But this one is full of clunker lines all the way through that land with an oof.
Yeah, I feel like you needed, like someone like Patton Oswalt or even like a Shane Black or someone like that to come in
definitely.
and rewrite the dialogue. Because I feel like if that had happened, even if it had flopped, it would have been like, it could have been one of those all-time cult favorites.
Yes.
And even though it's a cult now, I think it's still very much kind of, niche.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of, watching it, I was like, I'm actually enjoying this a lot more than I did the first time round. And I was like, oh, if only it had lent into that.
Yeah.
I think that's why I kept sort of comparing it to like Big Trouble, because it could have been something like that.
Yeah.
But it's almost there, but it's not. Mm-hmm. And it's stuck in the middle, I think. I think that's the issue. I think that may have been the issue that the studio had with it as well, that it's not really one thing or the other. And it can be taken the wrong way because of that, I think, which is obviously what happened with me the first time.
Of course, yeah. And I do think you're 100% correct in terms of, like, this is the thing that's just presenting it from reaching that full potential of being that true cult favorite B-movie. And although it does have a cult following now, it has got a really nice release from, I think it was someone like Scream Factory or something that, one of those niche American cult distributors. And although it does have a following enough for them to release that type of Blu-ray, I still think it's what you would call like a second-tier cult film. It's not really risen to the full ranks and to its full potential. And I do think that is the reason. Like, it's a fun film. It's got a lot of fun characters. It's clear that people are having fun making the film and acting in the film. And I think that sense of fun and that sense of charm is what won me over as well. And also its mean streak as well at times. But it is missing a certain sense of wit.
If it had been a little bit sharper.
That's it, yeah. Like, even just in terms of the, like, when you mention Shane Black, yeah, absolutely. Especially in terms of, like, because this is a film populated by villainous characters as well.
Yeah.
Like, even our main characters are essentially anti-heroes. The people that survive are essentially like a for-hire mercenary and a safe-cracking jewel stealer or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you could have a lot more like kind of Shane Black-esque witty banter between these criminals rather than just, because they're a bit jockish, essentially, a bit dumb and blunt.
Yeah, and I just think there's just a little bit too much of that clunky dialogue.
Yeah.
There are witty moments and some really great black humorous things in there, but there's just a few too many. I mean, I wrote earlier that I thought that Jason Fleming was done dirty by the script because he has
he really is.
He has all the worst lines in the film.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's because he was delivering them in his kind of, I don't know. I don't know what it is with Jason Fleming in this film. Even though he's English, everything sounded really Mockney. It didn't quite fit. It sounded like the dialogue had been written for an American and he tried to channel that into what he does, but it didn't quite work.
But it's weird as well because Stephen Sommers had worked with him previously on The Jungle Book and said that this role was specifically written for Jason Fleming to be in the film. And I get the feeling that it's not so much a Jason Fleming thing as much as it is a direction thing, that he's been told to play the character a certain way. I think that's where it comes from, is essentially you've got an American that doesn't really know how English people truly speak. And is just asking Jason Fleming to play into that. It reminds me of, we've talked about this previously, but like Kate Dickie in Prometheus, where she's, you know, the way that she speaks is entirely unnatural, despite the fact that she's speaking in a normal accent.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Jason Fleming has really done a dirty by this film, especially because he's a great actor. I like Jason Fleming. Even in his death scene, he has a little moment where he, like the moment where he really sells that it's behind him, you know, tears rolling down his face as he's about to be killed. It's like, this is clearly a good actor. Why does he sound like shit through the entire film?
Yeah. I think the other one that suffers from that is is it Una Damon, who plays like is it the Layla character, the girlfriend?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Kevin
Every
Jacob.
line.
It's
Every
just,
single line.
I'm not sure whether it's because she herself is not very good or whether it's just she's given some dog shit dialogue or a bit of both. I don't know.
Yeah.
I just wrote, actress playing Leela is terrible. Like,
every line lands with a thud.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's the writing, the direction, or the acting, but
I think that's a perfect storm of everything.
one of the things that I did want to mention with regards to Deep Rising as well is looking at this and The Mummy, because they are films that were made consecutively, even though there is something of a gap between them. It really represents what I would call the golden period in Stephen Sommers' career. This is a very small window where like everything seemed to be okay for Stephen Sommers. Looking at these films, it's another case of we're in a transitional period for the industry. CGI is slowly coming into dominance, but it's not quite there yet. So filmmakers are still being forced to utilize a merging of the two, practical effects and computer imagery. And I think that's where both this and The Mummy succeed, is because the special effects aren't there 100% yet, and because they know their limitations in terms of what they can achieve. They're forced to really spend a lot of time looking at the structure of their films, how, when, and where they do show their big monsters and that type of thing. And one thing that I think that both this film and The Mummy have in common is that there's a lot of hard work done with the characters, even though the characters themselves are very two-dimensional. You know, they're essentially cardboard cutouts, but there's a lot of work done in terms of the slow build-up before those characters, those big monsters, the central monsters, are revealed. In The Mummy, I think it's about 45 minutes to 50 minutes before we see the mummy, and in Deep Rising, it's nearly an hour in the film before we see the monster. They have a presence all the way through those first 45 minutes, but we don't really get to see a good glimpse of them until that mark. If we take that, like somebody that clearly has a knowledge of structure and in terms of when and where they can show their creatures, and then we apply it to the likes of The Mummy Returns and Van Helsing, where it's like he's just been allowed to indulge straight from the off and has blown his load so early that
the balance is now off
completely. And even, I mean, G.I. Joe. Was it Rise of the Cobra?
Rise of Cobra.
I went to the cinema to see that film.
I now have less respect for you.
You can't have less than zero. I went to see that film because I'd heard that Christopher Eccleston's accent was something to behold, and it really is. I think he plays somebody like a Scottish character, and it was special. It was a special moment.
I saw Christopher Eccleston the other week.
Oh yes, so you said.
He let us through the door in.
He coughed on you, didn't he? As you were.
I was in Clitheroe of all places.
You're not going to publicise his address, are you? On the show?
No. But yeah, I think he was having a day with his kids and his mum.
Aww.
I think he's doing all right at the moment, actually, because like he's aired a few cobwebs. I think doing this new Doctor audio series is
Yes.
exercising a few demons.
Will we see him return to the screen as the Doctor once more? I think there may be a special in the future if things go well with this audio.
Oh, I'm hoping. I mean, discussing Doctor Who is another episode entirely. I think,
It's a minefield at the moment, isn't it?
yeah, it is. It's a bit of a mess, but never mind. Yeah, I think the balance goes completely because, I think The Mummy is, another great example of it was never going to be a great film, but I think it still works as a fun, family-friendly blockbuster horror. And also, I think this is, I'm slightly jumping the gun here because this is something that we're going to discuss in a few episodes' time, but the fact that I think The Mummy, especially the original film, has endured all these years to the point where when they try rebooting The Mummy, that people have really pushed back on it because they're still in love with that 90s. I'm not going to say the original Mummy because it's not, but that 90s Brendan Fraser Mummy, and the fact that it's still like one of the most popular rides at Universal Studios. Yeah. As a ride. It was almost like I feel they were jumping the gun trying to reboot it at that moment. It was the wrong time to reboot The Mummy because I think it was still in people's minds.
I had a few notes in here that I had written in regards to Stephen Sommers' work on The Mummy, but I think it's probably safe to...
we shall save them for another day.
If we shelve those notes for another day.
This bit we will edit out.
No, I'm all about the truth here on Popcorn Digest. So everything stays in. That's how I end up with so many kids.
Yeah, the other cast members we haven't mentioned at all, who I think deserve mentioning, are Anthony Heald as Simon Kenton and Derek O'Connor.
And his wig.
Yeah. His toupee.
Honestly. Because for a man that's clearly about 90 years old, his hair looks like it belongs to a fucking 19-year-old emo rocker.
Like, if the film had been sharper and lent more into the black humor, wouldn't that have been a funny thing to do? Where he was squeezed so hard that his skull cracks and his toupee flies off.
I know that was
in a shower of blood. And it could have made a thing about him like being touchy about it being a toupee. It would have been great. I think that would have lent that character an extra dimension because it's strange that character is played by Derek O'Connor and yet it's so flat. I understand that he did not enjoy making this film.
No, he said that his character essentially had nothing to do.
He's not even got a name, like a first name. Yeah. He's just credited as Captain in the credits.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't even realise.
Yeah. And he's only got the name Atherton because they obviously didn't have a name for him in the script, and the DOP is Howard Atherton, and they just thought, we'll use that surname. So maybe there was like, I'm Derek O'Connor and I'm giving a character that has no name.
Howard Atherton's a weird one as well. Like when I saw him, in terms of like who had made this film, when I saw what he looked like the guy behind Fatal Attraction and Bad Boys, I was expecting to see this kind of like young cinematographer, and it's this very, very old fella that's like, I like making dramas.
That's most DPs, isn't it?
To be honest, 100%.
Most DPs are like 50 plus.
Yeah, they're born at 50.
Yeah. Like Roger Deakins has been the same age for many years. Yeah.
And another weird one in terms of like crew members is that Dean Cundy works on the second unit, which number one, he's on second unit rather than as a DOP himself.
Yeah.
He's like doing all of the special effects stuff and all of the action scenes, anything that really isn't with the main actors, your main talent.
I'm wondering whether it's a last minute favour.
Very, very well could be.
Although I think around this time, Dean Cundy's career, I'm not sure whether it started to go pear-shaped or whether he wanted to step back, but he starts doing if you look at his filmography, it goes into a weird place.
Yeah, and it very shortly arrives at Jack and Jill.
Yeah.
The Adam Sandler monstrosity. I mean, for all of the monsters that are in Deep Rising, nothing in this film is as monstrous as the film that is Jack and Jill starring Adam Sandler.
I mean, I don't understand how you can be the DOP for the Back to the Future movies and Jurassic Park and then go from there to Jack and Jill. I don't know how that happens.
Somebody's got something on him, I think.
We don't want to Dunkachino into that.
Dunkachino. I've started following a Twitter page that is just every day they post the Dunkachino scene, but with a new twist. Like they released it the other day where it had been dubbed in Japanese, and the day before it was the Dunkachino scene where the audio was forward, but every shot is in reverse.
I want that link.
And, yeah, we'll send it to you. It's been one of the highlights of my day every day, seeing what are they going to do with the Dunkachino advert this time.
Anyway, we got to see a lot of people's chocolate band in this film anyway, so...
Yeah. Oh my gosh. But... I will say as well, because they spend so long not wanting to show the creatures in the first hour, when people do die, it is the same template of death over and over again, which is somebody is dragged backwards between some pipes
on a cable,
or in a yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think maybe they could have come up with a few more creative deaths, I think, in this film, but it looks like they maybe did, but then they were asked to tone back on it, again with that whole brain popping situation. And
it does seem to be building towards the film's one truly horrifying death scene.
Oh yeah,
which still stands up today, I would say. One of the things I did watch a couple of featurettes online, and one of them did show, I forgot the name of the character now.
Billy,
that was it. Yeah, so Billy's death scene. This is when we see the half-digested, still-living carcass of Billy.
Yeah.
We see the creatures for the first time. They open fire at the creatures. Its stomach opens up, and out pops Billy, a character that we'd seen in a previous scene. And he's half-digested. Half of his head has disappeared. It's been melted away, and he's still alive, of all things. It's a truly horrifying moment, and the special effects gag really, really holds up well. You can see everything. I was actually shocked to see that I'd always thought it was a straight CGI effect shot, but actually it did utilize a lot of practical elements as well. In the making of, you can see just a glimpse, a moment in which somebody is working on a sculpture, like a maquette of it, and an actual mask for the actor to wear as well. So I imagine there's been a lot of prosthetic work based on the parts of the face that you can still see, but he may have been wearing a green cap for half of his head.
Yeah.
But it looks great, I would say.
In fact, as well, that sequence, I imagine it's a combination of a Rob Bottin makeup thing and the CGI, but the CGI part of it was done by a separate studio that only worked on that sequence. So if you look at the credits, when it lists obviously all the companies doing the CGI, like DreamQuest and ILM and Banned from the Ranch, which I found out was a funny story where they're all ex-ILM employees that got banned from Lucasfilm.
For breaking into his library just to read through some forbidden journals.
I love it.
It's like the story of Adam and Eve told in the Skywalker Ranch.
Yeah, but a company called Blur Studios did this, and they are credited with doing half-digested Billy in the end credits. Half-digested Billy by Blur Studios.
He sounds like the worst superhero sidekick ever.
I am half-digested Billy.
Just turns up and grosses everybody out.
Yeah, that sounds like a Mystery Men character.
It really, which is another Wes Studi.
Oh, yeah.
Wes Studi's been in some strange films, man. Mm-hmm. You know what the thing is I like about Wes Studi is that no matter how stupid the film is, and I'm referencing Mystery Men as well, he still plays it to foot, man. He really goes to number 11 for everything. I really like him. He's one of those character actors that I'm always happy to see in movies of this type.
Yeah.
And considering that he got his start in Dances with Wolves and of course Last of the Mohicans.
Yeah.
He did carve out a niche for himself in action films and B movies.
Definitely. But yeah, I would say that Billy sequence still holds up. I'd actually forgotten about it completely, and then when it came up again, I was like, Jesus, that looks great. It looks horrible. Yeah. But especially a film, it was released in 98, but it would have all been done in 97.
And it wasn't a big budget film.
No.
It's only $45 million, which for the time, it was a mid-budget film, firmly mid-budget.
But the fact that holds up now, I mean, if you plonk that in a film made now, no one would question it, or it wouldn't be jarring at all.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the other effects in this film, definitely. But that one is particularly, it would work still fine now. I wouldn't change anything on it, actually. I think it's I would say as an effect sequence, and a melding of the live action and the CG, it's near on perfect, I would say.
It is the film's crowning achievement.
Yeah.
And I do like a lot of the work on the creatures, on the tentacles themselves. But I will say that once it is revealed, like I say, there's a lot of hard work put into revealing these creatures. There's a lot of great sound effect work. The sound design in this film I very much enjoyed. I like how unsettling the creatures do sound. And they're given a presence long before you actually see them through this whale noise that you can hear. However, when they are revealed, I would say that you probably see too much of them. There's probably too much shown of them. They work best when they're obscured or only seen in glimpses, really. And there's some scenes and shots that work really, really well, but there's others where we're just allowed to dwell on them too long, and you can see that the textures themselves are not as detailed as they would be now, or as detailed as a practical effect would be. But I get that this is, as you mentioned, a transitional film, and they're really kind of pushing the envelope of what they can do within this budget range as well. When I first saw this film, I saw it on VHS, as I did mention, and I think that really helps the film, because I was like, oh my god, this is a special effects extravaganza and everything looks amazing. I think it was helped out by the fact that VHS was not the highest of qualities. And yeah, actually, speaking about Billy's death as well, and about the creatures and the effectiveness of the creatures, I will say, I know that there's like this real over-the-top expositional moment where someone that shouldn't know as much about these creatures somehow does. And what's his name? Anthony Held.
Canton,
that's it. Yeah, he's a bit of a Canton, isn't he? He's a soppy Canton. By the end of the film, he's soaked.
Yeah.
You sappy Canton. So he does deliver a lot of exposition about these creatures and about what their method of eating is when it comes to the victims. And I would say that when I was a kid as well terrified me. That, coupled with the image of Billy half digested, I think sold me a lot on this movie. But the whole idea that they are essentially like the Sarlacc pit from Return of the Jedi, in which if you get eaten by these things, you're still very much alive while they... he says that they drink you alive. They essentially absorb all of the moisture and blood inside your body, and then they excrete the remains. And when you do see the remains of people as well, it's horrible. Truly. Like, all of the skeletal remains of people seem to be, like, twisted in agony and screaming. I would say that's the mean streak in this film that I like. I do think a lot of creature features, they do forget that the creatures themselves have to be quite formidable and not just... I feel like a lot of them fall into the habit, especially now in terms of, like, showing too much and doing too much with their creatures, where I think sometimes just... a nasty idea will do the trick.
Yeah.
That's very effective for me. And it's effective in a way that, despite Van Helsing having like 4 or 5 of horror cinema's greatest monster icons, there's not one single shot or scene or idea as effective as half-digested Billy falling out of one of the tentacles from this film.
Going from here to there, it's like night and day. But yeah, as to the creature itself, I'm still not sure whether is it multiple creatures or is it one big creature with like, I don't know.
Citation needed.
I don't get the geography of the creature. I don't get the geography of the ship, and I don't get the geography of the creature either.
No, where the film loses me is when it reveals the giant Lovecraftian beast at the film's center.
Yeah.
Because for that exact reason that you've just mentioned, I think we're led to believe that the tentacles themselves are part of this giant squid monster, but I don't think it's really... One, I don't think that the special effects, like that's where the special effects really fall down with that monster. And 2, I don't think conceptually it's a... I would actually think that the films would be far more effective if it's just hinted at there being some giant behemoth behind all this, but we only see it in glimpses and we never really get an idea of what it is. That it's essentially, in that Lovecraftian sense, unknowable and unseen. I think the moment that they show it is where the film loses me a little bit. And also, just in regards to the ship, one thing I would say is it's not so much the geography for me. I think the sets that they use are very good. It does look like a cruise ship, although it does utilize more open spaces. But what I would say for me is that it's lacking far more character. I would actually appreciate this more if it was more so like the Overlook Hotel of the Seas or that type of thing. It just feels very stock cruise ship to me. And none of the corridors that these people are running through have any sense of character for this ship.
Yeah, I kind of felt they should have, because they had things like the pagodas and stuff in the main atrium, they should have maybe lent a bit more into the sort of oriental design and have that flow throughout the ship.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it is a little bit more generic cruise ship.
Yeah.
For me as well, given the fact that the Argonautica, which I think is an incredibly clunky name for a ship, like, it's supposed to be like the most luxurious cruise ship ever built. Doesn't really look like that, to be honest. Like,
no, it's supposed to be giant as well, and it feels really small. It feels like it's mainly this one big hall and then a lot of like servicing corridors.
Yeah.
And even the hall itself, where's the mall? Because every cruise ship has like,
Yeah.
you know, I've seen that on many cruise ships, and there's always like, where's the entertainment section? It feels like everybody's just come here simply for two things: a giant hall and a casino.
It's like they've used this cruise ship as a location, but then they're not particularly interested in using the tropes and areas that you would get in a cruise ship. Like, yeah, there would be a pool area, there'd be a theatre. Yeah, you got the mall, you got the restaurant. Like, the only thing they use is the kitchen.
Yeah.
And even that, it's a really quite small kitchen for such a huge... Yeah, it doesn't utilise its location well enough, I don't think.
No, it falls into that Speed 2 cruise control trap.
Yeah.
I will say that of the two cruise ship movies that came out in the late 90s, this is certainly the better one for me.
It's not hard.
But as dull as the actual location is, the cruise ship is, the explosion of that cruise ship is magnificent.
Yeah, it is.
It's a wonderful special effect because it looks very to scale considering it's a miniature explosion.
Yeah, no, that was done very well. One of the only things I can think of is the that we haven't spoken about is Kevin J. O'Connor.
Yes,
who will become the Stephen Sommers guy. Yeah, he has a promising future ahead of him in Stephen Sommers movies.
I mean, and they're making many Stephen Sommers films at the moment.
Yeah.
He's got his fingers in so many pies at the moment.
I felt that's a bit of a disservice because obviously he's been in a few Paul Thomas Anderson films since.
Yeah, he's got a great little vignette in There Will Be Blood.
But it's strange that he becomes the continuity that runs throughout all the following Stephen Sommers movies.
Do you think they're like connected in some sort of like Blackadder sense, in which the same character reincarnated across these multiple different films?
Yeah, they're all Benny. The other thing as well, a completely unrelated note, and I'm not sure whether this is something that happened, but obviously Kevin J. O'Connor has a very distinctive voice. And going back to, well, not a few episodes ago, because obviously it's an unreleased episode that was recorded a long time ago, but when we were talking about Anastasia and Hank Azaria doing the voice of Bartok, I am wondering whether he based his voice on Kevin O'Connor, because they do sound very similar.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
To the point where, why didn't they just ask him to voice that character? They wanted that voice because it is very, very similar.
And one thing that I will say about Kevin J. O'Connor in these films as well is that he's always the thing that works most for me about a Stephen Sommers film.
Yeah.
I think he always falls just on the right side of annoying. Like, it always just about works for the character. And he's never too annoying that it becomes a hindrance on the film. I mean, with the likes of Van Helsing and stuff like that, he's barely in that as Igor. But in this film, he actually ad-libbed a lot of his own lines as well, like the whole "can you just get asthma" being the one that everybody seems to be referencing.
Yeah.
I quite like him, to be honest.
Yeah.
But he definitely is the Stephen Sommers guy.
I do find it funny how they do a Jaws of Revenge in this film. With he's the Mario Van Peebles of the film, where I don't know what the original death scene of him, whether he's just supposed to disappear, but...
If he had supposed to have just disappeared, that would have been a really dull death scene for a prominent character.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether anything else was shot for that, but the fact that, when they do the obviously reshot beach scene, he just suddenly appears on a plank, just swimming.
Yeah, it also reminds me of Jurassic Park 3. I forgot the name of the character in that.
Oh,
but
Billy.
He has Billy. Oh, there's another Billy?
Another Billy.
Yeah, but he has a very similar death scene. And
he has the worst.
Yeah.
He's not even a redeeming character that you want to see live. Because he's a complete tool in the film. and responsible for all the issues that they have, for a lot of the issues involving the eggs in that film.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, it was perfectly logical for him to not survive in that film, but I don't know why they did that. But the only thing I'm thinking is when they did the original test is that there was no death scene for him. And, he does disappear, so maybe the audience didn't find that satisfactory.
Yeah.
So instead of doing a death scene, which I would imagine would have been more expensive, they decided to just let him live, and it would have been easier to have just shot him on the beach.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Because, I'm thinking if they did do a death for him, it would have had to have been a worthy death.
Absolutely. And that's something that I was going to mention as well in regards to Wes Studi's death. We've spoken about it on this podcast before about making sure that the villains get deaths that are appropriate to their characters in terms of the villainy of these characters. And Wes Studi definitely gets that death in this film. His death is one of my favorite moments in this film as well. We have Billy's death earlier on, which is a very mean death. And then you have Wes Studi's death, where we've been given this explanation for how awful it is to be eaten by these creatures and what fate awaits us if that happens to you. And we find Wes Studi half engulfed in one of the tentacles' mouths, and Joey finds a gun and gives it to him to say, it's probably best to shoot yourself rather than be digested by these creatures. And then just as Joey's running away, he spends his last bullet trying to kill him. Yeah. And when he turns the gun on himself, there's no bullets left. It's like, that's a great moment.
Yeah.
That's like he died fulfilling like a character promise.
Yeah. There's two other character deaths that I like that we haven't mentioned. I mean, one of the funniest is the
Jaimin Hansu? Yeah.
Is it Diamond Hansu? Yeah, Diamond Hansu.
I think it's Jaimin.
Yeah, this is just hilarious. Like he's just going money, 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 and then it's like whack. And his expression is priceless.
It's the Jerry Goldsmith sting as well that comes in, the like little sting of music. It's just like it's fucking great.
I also like Anthony Heald's death as well. Like, the protracted death of him jumping on the boat and breaking his legs, which is grueling. Mm-hmm. That's another appropriate death, being killed by basically blowing up his own ship. Yeah, which is what he wanted in the first place. So I think that those are two other sort of noteworthy deaths, whereas some of the other ones are a little bit less imaginative, especially some of the earlier ones like T-Ray or Colin Farrell. As I'd like to call him.
That's like I say, I think there's too many deaths of people just getting pulled backwards through water to their deaths on wires. That's in those early scenes while they're still like building up to show the creature.
Although I liked the earlier one during the sort of Poseidon Adventure disaster bit where we have death by toilet.
I will say that I love the sound effects in this film, but there is a moment in which she's sat on the toilet where you hear a very squelchy shit my pants kind of noise. Just moments before she's dragged backwards through a very small space.
Maybe this is a dream catcher moment there.
Yeah, it's a little shit weasel.
Little shit weasel, yeah.
I mean, that was supposed to be like the new chest burster sequence. The shit weasel.
That's what were they thinking?
Well, I know what Stephen King was thinking.
Whilst he was on drugs.
When is my next hit of OxyContin? Or I think he was probably thinking as well, boy, do my legs and back hurt.
Yeah.
There's one more thing that I did want to mention as well, just to single out, but the body that Layla comes across in the ship looks remarkably like Ben Gardner's body from Jaws.
Yeah.
I do think that is definitely like a little purposeful reference to Ben Gardner.
Yeah.
So I think what we'll do is, before we provide our summaries for this film, I think we'll move on to the stats and facts just to give you an idea of how well this film really did at the box office. I'm sure you'd be shocked to hear, Andy, that it didn't do too well at all.
No.
So we'll begin with the box office, and I will say this film was made for a budget, as we have mentioned, of $45 million. And the overall box office that I have for this film, and I will say I could only find the North American box office, and it had a overall total of $11.2 million, and it opened to number 8 at the first weekend of release. And just to give you an idea as well of the types of films that had been released at that time, I'll provide you with what the top 10 were. So at number 1, you have Titanic which I think had already fulfilled everybody's need to see a great big boat get destroyed.
Yeah.
And number 2 was Great Expectations, which wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. Sorry, that was a bad joke. Number 3 was Good Will Hunting.
Yeah.
Number 4 was the classic that everybody loves, Spice World, the film about the Manchester drug crisis. Number 5 was As Good as It Gets. Number 6 was Desperate Measures, and another one of those films that I rented from our video shop that I thought was going to come out in the cinema, and it just never got released. That was the Andy Garcia, Michael Keaton action thriller. Ooh. Yeah, it's not very good. Number 7 was Wag the Dog. Number 8 was Deep Rising. This is, again, the first week of release. Number 9 was the Denzel Washington star in Fallen, which is actually pretty good. And number 10 was that other soppy movie, Hard Rain. and again, by this point as well, we had already had released in the cinemas Mimic, Anaconda, and I believe...
Oh, The Relic.
And The Relic as well, to varying degrees of success with those films as well. So it came at the very end of really like a creature feature boom. And really by that point, people were tired of seeing the creature features.
And I think also around that time as well, you would have had the anticipation ramping up for Godzilla, which appeared later on in the year. So it's kind of sandwiched between those sort of, I'd say, lower budget creature features like Anaconda, which are very goofy and everything. And then, something like Godzilla, which is a huge budget monster movie. I don't know why it doesn't get mentioned as well, like the fact that we've had, Jurassic Park, The Lost World come out that summer in 97 as well. So in terms of like monster movies, creature features, they've had a lot in 97.
One other thing I think may have gone into picking this as a release date, January, is to kind of capitalize in on the Titanic thing, being able to market it as the other cruise ship movie. Now, you did watch the trailer for this film as well, and I do know that the trailer's not supposed to be very good. And how was it in terms of the marketing of this film?
I didn't think it was as bad as I thought it was going to be. I think they actually, what they seem to have done is basically they seem to have ramped up the fun, irreverent side of the film.
Yeah.
They have actually marketed it as a romp.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In terms of marketing that angle of the film, I didn't think they did that badly. I think it was more the fact that maybe it was just misplaced within the market rather than more than anything else. If it had been released in the May 97 slot, it may have done better. I don't know whether it would ever have done great because I think it's still a bit of an almost movie where it's not one thing or the other. It should have been sharper. I think that's the downfall of the film.
No, I agree, and I think but I do think the potential is that if they had gotten the date right, for it to have made more, to at least have made its money back.
Yeah.
In that regard, even if it wouldn't have been like a smash hit. But I think essentially for a film about a cruise ship, they just missed the boat.
Yeah.
And one thing that you have mentioned was about Godzilla as well, which brings me to a point that I did want to touch upon, and that is the ending of this film.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that.
Now, I've read a couple of things in regards to the ending of this film. I was hoping to have actually listened to the commentary before we would do this podcast, so unfortunately I've not had that opportunity. But I've heard two separate ideas in regards to how this ending, what it was supposed to signify. One of them was that this was supposed to be Skull Island, and that it was going to be building up into the King Kong film. Like, this was essentially a stealth King Kong prequel. And that Stephen Sommers for some time was involved in trying to make a King Kong movie, or at least had inquired to do so. And that this film was supposed to end with that kind of tease of Skull Island. And then the other thing that I've actually heard, that in fact it was supposed to be a stealth prequel to Journey to the Center of the Earth, which is something that's mentioned, I believe, in the Oliver Harper video.
Yeah.
I've always heard the King Kong one, that it's supposed to be Skull Island.
Yeah, I think the King Kong idea is way more plausible.
Yeah.
It kind of almost feels like that kind of prototype for what they're doing at the moment with the sort of Monsterverse.
Yeah.
It almost feels like this film is, and the way that it's tying into something like that is almost like a test run for the kind of thing that they would do with this, the Godzilla, King Kong, Skull Island universe that I don't know where that is at the moment, because it's not the sequel didn't do so well.
No.
Well, I imagine it hinges on the next film.
I like the ending of this film. That's a clever sting. That's the kind of thing that I could imagine like Shane Black adding to a film, which is leaving the characters deep in this sense of peril, directly in danger of the next big monster. And in a way, I'm kind of like, I like where it's left us with those characters. I don't think we need any further exploration of the Deep Rising universe.
No.
Really. It's fine as it is. It's perfect. Leave it. You can't improve on perfection. So actually, yes, moving over to the critics' reaction to the film. This film has 29% on Rotten Tomatoes and
cool
an average
29%.
Very cool. It's a very strong 29%, you would say.
Yeah. Strongly rotten.
And it has a robust average rating of 4.14 out of 10.
Ooh.
So it's a well-loved film. And it's the consensus for the film is its fleeting glimpses of creature feature mayhem are certainly dumb fun, but Deep Rising cribs from far too many better movies to stand on its own. And in regards to the critic review, I've actually gone to Roger Ebert because he did include this on...
Most hated.
Yeah, it's on his most hated list, and I'm sure I've got a book here somewhere called Your Movie Sucks by Roger Ebert. He released a series of books called Your Movie Sucks, and it was just a collection of his most hated film reviews. And I'm pretty sure Deep Rising is in there somewhere. But his review for this film, just to give the last paragraph, he says... Bemusing how much money and effort go into the making of such a movie and how little thought. It's months of hard work, and for what? The movie is essentially an alien clone with a fresh paint job. You know something's wrong when a fearsome tentacle rears up out of the water and opens its mouth, and there are lots of other tentacles inside with their own ugly mouths, all filled with nasty teeth, and all you can think is, well, we've been there and we've seen that. And I actually think it's a scathing review that I actually disagree quite hard with in terms of the alien clone.
No, I don't get that.
I think it's more like Evil Dead 2. Like, it feels more like a Sam Raimi monster movie to me than it does...
But it feels mixed in with sort of that 70s disaster movie period, like...
Yes, I've written The Poseidon Adventure meets Evil Dead 2 in my notes.
Yeah, and there's another film as well, beyond The Poseidon Adventure, actually.
Yeah, the sequel to The Poseidon Adventure where they go to the wreckage.
That's another Michael Caine, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah,
it absolutely is.
Of those in the late 70s, like The Swarm and...
The Swarm is a prime candidate for this show,
But it
man.
feels like more of a piece with those sort of 70s disaster movies mixed with a bit of Harryhausen, and it feels more like that than an Alien, anything to do with Alien at all.
That's it. Yeah, put it like you say, it's a Irwin Allen disaster meets 50s monster movie creature feature of the week kind of film. It is a B movie and it's unashamedly a B movie as well, which I really appreciate about it. It doesn't have any quibbles about it. Like one film that I would say that's a B movie that it kind of leans too seriously into it that we've done on a podcast before is Virus. That's the other side of these things. This one is having a lot more fun with the idea, but it's not trying to reinvent the wheel. It's just like more so wanting to make that type of film done in a more contemporary standard. And I think it succeeds in terms of its modest goals. And just to give the audience score, though, it's still not a very well-loved film for the audience. It has 43%, but has a 3.6 out of 5 rating. IMDb has it much more favourably rated at 6.1 out of 10, which is getting towards what this film should have in terms of a rating as well. So yeah, this is one of those films that I've always referred to as a guilty pleasure, but actually I don't think I have much to be guilty about. It's an unashamedly B-movie-ish monster movie done quite well for the time that just needed a script polish to really take it to that next level. I don't think it's like I would refer it to in the same breath as like Tremors, which is a perfect movie and a film that you would never refer to as a guilty pleasure or that type of thing. But I think for, as mentioned, what its modest goals are, it does really quite well. I think it's a lot of fun. I have no problem recommending this to any like monster movie fans out there. So considering, to be honest, mate, that I was really expecting you to come into this film with a very like negative opinion, considering how strong the reaction was the last time that we watched it together. Yeah. And I'm really quite surprised that you've come into it with this sense of newfound positivity for this Stephen Sommers movie.
But I'm kind of almost like lamenting, like, if it had only been a little bit sharper and I think that's why I just keep using the sort of Big Trouble in Little China references, because it lent into that kind of style a little bit more. I mean, I don't know whether that would have helped the box office, because obviously Big Trouble was a flop in of itself, but I just felt like, wouldn't it have been fun if you'd had Treat Williams playing that kind of Jack Burton character, and they'd lent even more into it, where he does things wrong, and everything's a bit self-aware, and you'd have that exposition with the Canton character and people going, how the fuck does he know that, kind of thing, and and even the thing with the fact that you have that thief character and she's a terrible thief. They should have made something of that. And the fact that obviously she's locked up in that storing into that larder, and the fact that she gets out of it fairly easily. She should have got out of that much earlier on in the film, and maybe someone commented, hey, you could have got out of that. Why didn't you do that before? Almost like highlight the tropes and inconsistencies in the format. Yeah, do a kind of almost like parody thing on it, but still have that kind of threat being taken quite seriously. If they'd had those two things bouncing off each other, I think it could have been a more successful film.
You've actually just mentioned something though that I've got written down as one of the biggest faults on a character level as well, which is her character. She is a jewel thief. Yeah. And at no point does that come into play at all in the entire film. She gets captured very early on for being, as you mentioned, a very shitty jewel thief. Yeah. But at no point in the rest of the film is she able to redeem herself. Does her thievery come in to save the day or anything like that? That whole aspect to her character. I know it's Famke Janssen, and she's very endearing. She's very charismatic. She's got a lot of screen presence. But on a character level, nothing about that ever comes into effect for the remainder of the film.
No, I think that there needed to be more some sort of malarkey, like picking a lock or something
without
like that.
being discovered by having to do something having a booby trap where they've got to somehow navigate past the tentacles to get to a certain point to unlock something, to get a key card or whatever that only she can do as quietly as needs to be done. I mean, again, that's just going down to utilizing the characters correctly, and it does it some of the time but not all of the time. And I feel like if this film had been more consistent in its wit and what it does with the characters, it would have been received a little bit better. And I do think there's a few points in the film where I do think it takes itself a little bit too seriously. I feel like it's a little bit unsure as to what kind of film it's going to be. I'm not sure that's just down to Stephen Sommers, because obviously later on he's proven himself to be incredibly clunky director. Yes.
You only have to watch Van Helsing, or actually I think Mummy Returns may be even worse in terms of balancing tone, and it just goes off a cliff after The Mummy. But it's just it maybe just needed somebody a little bit smarter to come in and just ramp up those elements to make it.
I think Stephen Sommers allowed to indulge himself at his every whim. It's another one of those classic cautionary tales we always talk about in regards to the likes of George Lucas, where if you indulge these filmmakers and allow them to do everything that they want to do, they end up making some of the worst films. Whereas if you actually provide them with a set of restrictions and say, make a film around these limitations, and suddenly they have to think a bit more creatively and put effort into places that they wouldn't normally place their effort into. And again, I don't think Deep Rising is a perfect film, or it's not doing anything that we haven't seen before. It's not a remarkable film or that type of thing. I would say for a film that sets its expectations as being a 50s B movie done in a 90s standard, it really succeeds in that. But it has its limitations, and Sommers has been forced to think around how best to do that. It's an hour in before we see the creatures, and yet they've still got a very strong presence all the way through that first hour. You contrast that with The Mummy Returns, or the whole Jekyll and Hyde sequence in Van Helsing, where straight out the gate he's going in hard and dry. It really it's a real downfall for him as a filmmaker, because if you were to tell me, looking at Deep Rising, where Stephen Sommers needs to improve, I would say he just needs a writer. Get him a writer, and then you've got a solid filmmaker there. Whereas now I'm like, oh, he just needs to go into director jail.
Well, he seems to have done that anyway. After G.I. Joe, I think G.I. Joe was the last gasp of a filmmaker stuck in a certain period of time.
Yeah.
And everything's moved on from that. It was almost the case with Van Helsing. He just about got away with it with Van Helsing.
I would say, Andy, just as a yes or no, I mean, because even though, as you mentioned, you're much more positive, it's still a mixed reaction to the film. Is Deep Rising something that you would recommend to our audience?
It's hard.
Yeah, it's hard for me as well, but for completely different reasons.
I would say I would recommend it if you are into dumb, schlocky monster romps, and if you go into the movie with that in mind, it'll be fine. I'm thinking
You
about
said that like you know when you at school when you've got like a vaccination coming up and you're really nervous about it. That's what like you've kind of framed this as. It's okay, you're going to be fine.
Yeah,
it'll just hurt for about 90 minutes and then it's gone.
Yeah, but I was thinking of the other film that I watched at the same time, and it may have actually been Tremors, and because Tremors does that so well.
Oh, absolutely.
I think we watched this after Tremors as well, so I was really positive on Tremors, and then this comes along and really kind of fails at doing the same kind of thing. It was more emphasized, I think, whereas watching this like in isolation.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd seen Big Trouble in Little China before then. I think I'd seen it afterwards. I'd seen bits of it, but I'd never seen it all the way through. And then looking at that and then going, oh yeah, that's kind of he's doing that kind of thing. And I just had a bit more fun with it because of that.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're looking at it in a kind of a more serious monster movie like Aliens or even Predator, or even something like Godzilla, like the Gareth Edwards Godzilla, it's not gonna sit well with you.
No, I mean I agree, and I also agree as well that Tremors is a film that takes everything at Deep Rising everything that Deep Rising does, Tremors does better.
Yeah, as
we mentioned on that episode, Tremors for me is a perfect film. I can't really fault it. Deep Rising is not a perfect film.
Yeah.
But yeah, what you've just mentioned, then I think you have to be a certain type of film fan to like Deep Rising, and I am. Fortunately, I very much am a monster movie lover. I've always loved my monster movies. The weirder the monsters, the better as well. And I think this film succeeds for me in just being a fun, dumb action adventure monster movie, and as mentioned, just represents a part of a period in Stephen Sommers' career when maybe in this brief window of time he may have been seen as something slightly promising, but that is a time that's long behind us now.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to what we will be reviewing for our next episode, we're doing something a little bit differently. We're moving from our monster movies that we've done in this current batch and our Lawnmower Man movies to, well, I would say that we're going to be looking at one particular film, but it's going to really open up a discussion to many films in a saga.
I think this is going to be an epic.
Yes. So our next episode, we're actually going to be looking at Star Wars Episode 12. So very tired. We're going to be looking at Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise. Is it The Rise of Skywalker or The Rise of the Rise of
Skywalker? Yeah.
Yeah, The Rise of Skywalker. So we'll be looking at Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. I will say it's a film that I saw once at the cinema. I've not seen it since. I have it on 4K Blu-ray. I'm going to set a day aside. I'm going to watch all of the sequel trilogy. But this is going to be revisiting it for me on this occasion, and I have very strong opinions about this film.
Yeah,
and I think you do as well, Andy.
Yep, sure do.
So it's going to open up a discussion to really get into the whole of the situation surrounding
getting into
Lucasfilm. Getting into the hole. Yeah. A long time ago in a hole far, far away. Oh. So we'll be delving into that particular hole next week. But until then, it's bye from myself.
And damn straight, it's bye from me.
Thank you for listening.